Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Friday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with the National Weather Service. It's the 22nd of November. As always, we encourage you to visit our website at arh.noaa.gov or weather.gov and click on Alaska. You can always get our forecasts on NOAA Weather Radio as well. The weather info line is open at 800-472-0391. Find each Weather Service office on Twitter, on Facebook under U.S. National Weather Service Alaska, and on YouTube under NWS Anchorage. And in the mid-afternoon, you'll get a shortened version of this very broadcast going over the surface charts of what's to come, kind of a sneak peek of the full Alaska Weather Show. And after the show is over, you can go to YouTube, search for AKWX TV, and find the complete show. That's brought to you in part by this channel on Alaska Public. Here's a look at what's going on hazardous weather around the state. Southeastern warnings have expired now after rain has settled into many areas following a great dumping of snow, including places like Gustavus picking up over 30 inches of snow. We saw pictures from the National Park Service there today shoveling out. Around South Central, winter weather advisories continue into the early morning hours, some of those expiring around the Anchorage Bowl around midnight, into the Matanuska-Susitna valleys around 5 o'clock in the morning, and into the Copper River Basin around 7 o'clock in the morning. Again, all because of freezing rain and snow that's expected in the region. Most of the freezing rain has wound down, but we're still looking at snowfall that could accumulate to as little as 2 inches, perhaps in parts of Anchorage, maybe as much as 5 in other areas, to as much as 6 inches across parts of the Susitna Valley and out toward the Copper River Basin. So we're not done with the weather here in South Central just yet. Looking farther northward, winter weather advisories there for the Yukon Flats up toward the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range around Bettles, the central interior, as well as the Deltana and Tanana Flats regions. There, you might be looking at another 2 to 6 inches of snow as well. For some areas, though, around the middle Yukon and lower Koyukuk valleys, around Galena, for example, you might be dealing with storm totals as much as 6 to 12 inches of snow, and that's where we find a winter storm warning. Winter weather advisory is still farther west downriver. And across the Arctic coast, blizzard warnings continue until tomorrow morning, looking at only 1 inch of snow. However, the winds today will continue through tonight, and gusts upwards of 55 miles per hour may be possible there. For areas around southwest Alaska, the Aleutians, Kodiak Island, and the Pribilofs, there are no current warnings for you. However, small craft advisories and gales may continue, especially on the south side of the Aleutians as we head into the weekend. Looking at the satellite picture now across the Bering Sea and the North Pacific, you can see another wave setting up here across the Aleutians. This again will create gales, especially on the south side of the Aleutians through Saturday and maybe into Sunday farther east. Low pressure is well to the south of the Aleutian chain, and that's dragging a lot of cold and air and low cloud cover across the Bering Sea. For the west coast, you can see that a lot of the weather is wrapping around, and the stronger northerly winds will be wrapping in snow across parts of west and southwestern Alaska as we go through Saturday and Sunday. We don't see too many active weather systems a little bit farther west, but bear in mind there's certainly plenty of cold air that will be coming in on the western side of Alaska. As we look out across eastern Alaska and southeastern Alaska particularly, the snow has ended, but we're still dealing with a pretty healthy fetch of southerly wind, bringing in warm and wet air to southeast. And with that, periods of rain continue there. In fact, parts of Yakutat, we're looking at more than 2.5 inches of rainfall just today alone. Out across the Prince William Sound region, the frontal boundary was working through earlier today. Places like Whittier were dealing with rain for a good part of the morning hours there. The frontal boundary working from south to north slowly over the Kenai Peninsula earlier today, and that caught a large part of the Anchorage Bowl under freezing rain. It started out as light snow earlier this morning, then transitioned to more of a rainfall event. Problem was the lowest layer of the air was still very cold, and so was the surface. So a lot of that froze as it reached the ground, and cold surfaces, including cars and roadways. As the cold front moved in from south to north, that brought snow back through the region, and snow is still falling in many parts of South Central at this hour. Across the interior, still looking at snow there, and again, some pretty lower accumulations, let's say, for the central interior, with the exception of the lower Koyukuk Valley and the middle Yukon Valley. They could, again, be looking at totals around 12 inches or so. This entire system is bringing in stronger winds from east to west across the Beaufort Seacoast, and that's where we've seen some pretty strong gusts today around Barter Island. Some of those were reaching 55 miles per hour. And again, if you watch the weather pattern, that's going to drag that northerly wind around through the Bering Strait, and we'll be talking about the ice edge here in just a little bit, but the forecasts are that probably by this time next week, Bering Strait will be pretty close to closing off, if not entirely closed off. Low pressure situated right across the Susitna Valley. This moved right up over the Kenai Peninsula earlier today and up the Cook Inlet. It's now at 984 millibars, give or take. And another wave there just to the west of Sitka at 993 millibars. So again, a pretty decent southerly fetch and some stronger winds moving through that region today. The warmer air still working up against the Alaska range. Some gusty winds at times across the Yukon in the central and eastern interior. Also blowing and drifting snow and blizzard conditions there for the Arctic coast. You can see that wraparound wind on the backside of this overall circulation. Moving through St. Lawrence Island, St. Matthew Island waters there, the Pribilof, so you're bringing some areas of fog there. And our next storm already making its appearance across the North Pacific at 984 millibars. Now watch the progression of the pattern over the next three charts there. I think what you'll see is that colder high pressure is slowly winning over more of north and western Canada, the Alaska region, as well as eastern parts of Siberia. The low pressure is trying to make inroads in it through tonight, though, and you can see that rain will continue across parts of southeast. Mixed precipitation at times, most of that winding it down and turning into snow for south central, the interior, and certainly farther north into the northern interior and the Brooks Range, and gusty winds and snow still possible across the Arctic coast, with high pressure working its way southward a little bit more toward the Aleutians. You'll notice that North Pacific wave having trouble breaking into that because of its dominance there across eastern Siberia. Stronger winds working through the Bering Strait and into Bristol Bay. Looks like an upslope snow event for perhaps areas around the western side of the Alaska range. Watch as that continues even as high pressure tries to settle into the YK Delta for Saturday. High pressure also trying to set up across central and eastern parts of the Gulf of Alaska. That may keep rain offshore, but it looks like snow showers will still be possible across a large part of south central and the Copper River Basin. Rain showers still likely for parts of southeast. It looks like more of a snow shower situation for parts of the Anchorage area, the Matanuska-Susitna valleys. Talkeetna has a better chance of seeing accumulating snow during Saturday. But as we get into Sunday, a better chance for a partly sunny sky to break out across parts of the Cook Inlet. A little more clearing opportunities for the central and western interior, including parts around the Seward Peninsula. Maybe some snow showers around the Bering Strait itself, but Nome may be relatively dry. Low pressure working up through the North Pacific, and the eastern Aleutians may drag a chance of rain and snow across parts of Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. The Alaska Peninsula still looking at some snow showers there into Bristol Bay and parts of the YK Delta. Central sections of the interior, the western parts of the Yukon, under the effects of high pressure, may see some fog, some of that getting hard to scour out this time of the year. In areas of flurries and fog, as well as some light breezes there across the Arctic coast, all of the wind should be diminishing across the Arctic coast as we head through the end of the weekend. And warmer air still trying to make inroads into southeastern Alaska, where decreasing clouds should be the rule for parts of the northern sections of the Panhandle, and yet another wave is working its way in from the west. Let's look at the weather situation across Alaska. Let's check on temperatures that we saw around the 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock hour this afternoon. 30s and 40s for a large part of southeast. In fact, most areas this afternoon made it into the low to mid 40s. So there certainly was some recovery. Petersburg was suffering a little bit at 39 degrees. Sitka and areas around Heidelberg were some of the warmest temperatures we saw in the entire state this afternoon. Again, with that stronger southerly surge, Juneau was around 41 degrees. Around Yakutat, 41, Prince William Sound, 30s and 40s there. Cordova, though, clearly much warmer at 41. Around Kenai, 27 degrees. Areas of snow had developed by late morning there for Seward and Homer, both temperatures in the 30s. Anchorage made it up to 30 degrees by late afternoon. 24, though, around Palmer and Wasilla. Talkeetna, 23. Squentin also holding in the 20s. Single-digit temps for Glen Allen and areas around the Matanuska Glacier there. Heading up the road even more along the parks. Difficult driving conditions for many areas in south central, including the parks there. 37 around Healy. Greeley was only 6. 14 in Fairbanks, Northway and Eagle, anywhere from 10 to 25 degrees. Farther north still, Fort Yukon, 9 degrees, about the same there in Arctic Village. Temperatures had really warmed up, if you can believe that, for parts of the north there, sounding like temperatures at 2 below are warm, but only if you're in Anaktuvuk Pass, where conditions had been substantially colder earlier in the week. Single-digit territory for areas from Wainwright all the way east to the Beaufort Seacoast and Kaktovik at 6 degrees, 0 in Barrow, 8 below around Point Hope and Point Lay. Kotzebue Sound was looking at temperatures in the single digits there, including Kotzebue itself around 12, Kivalina only 5 with Shishmaref at 16, Nome was 13, Unalakleet around 10 with Galena, and areas in the lower Koyukuk and mid-Yukon valleys, and maybe in the low to mid-teens for the most part. Bettles and Ambler both surrounding that 10-degree mark. McGrath was colder at 7 degrees, with Bethel at 6 below, while surrounding areas along the coast were substantially warmer, anywhere from the low to mid-teens and even low to mid-20s across parts of the Bristol Bay region. The Alaskan Peninsula in the 20s and 30s. Kodiak was showing 30 degrees after a snowy day yesterday, upper 20s for the Pribilofs, with temperatures mainly above freezing for the central and western Aleutians. Overnight low temperatures across the west will mainly hold above freezing again for the chain out toward the Alaska Peninsula, where temperatures closer to the Bristol Bay will go sub-freezing, probably looking at 21 or so around King Salmon, 14 in Dillingham. Nunivak Island about 18, with Bethel warming to 1 above. Most of the Norton Sound region will be at 0 or maybe even colder, anywhere from 5 to 10 below in some parts around Grayling and points eastward. Into the interior we go, and temps probably dropping off to about 5 to 10 below, including Fairbanks at 7 below. For Yukon, 14 below. North of the Brooks Range we go, and temps probably from 5 to 10 below, including areas around Wainwright, Barrow, out toward Kaktovik, to 2 above. Parts of the Kotzebue Sound region anywhere from 10 above to about 5 below, including areas around Kivalina. Parts of southeast likely looking at temps at freezing or above to about 40 in Sitka, and lower 40s from Ketchikan to Annette. With high temperatures there tomorrow, not moving very much. Expect most areas to stay well below the 50-degree mark, probably a little bit farther south into the mid to upper 40s will be the best you can do. 40 or so around Juneau, temps in Prince William Sound, 20s and 30s there. It's well for the Kenai Peninsula, Kenai itself 29. 27 in Anchorage and areas in the Mat-Su Valley, likely in the low to mid-20s. 15 or so around Glen Ellen. The interior and north of the Alaska Range in the single digits. Some places like Healy might make it to about 10 degrees or so, but not a whole lot of warmth for you. Single-digit territory or below for Fort Yukon and areas northward Anaktuvuk Pass, the Arctic coast, single digits. The Seward Peninsula likely in the single digits to mid-teens there around Nome. St. Lawrence Island, you're at 23. Bethel, 8 degrees, and areas around Bristol Bay again in the upper 20s. Here's a look at flying weather now. Conditions will gradually be improving as far as visibility goes for the west coast, but look for a large swath of MVFR conditions mainly north of the Alaska Range and down the YK Delta. For parts of the Gulf of Alaska, MVFR conditions for quite a bit of territory from the Mat-Su Valley stretching across the Kenai Peninsula and across the north and eastern Gulf, including a wide swath in southeastern Alaska. And IFR conditions likely for the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula, the eastern Aleutians, and the far western sections of areas just south of the chain. And IFR expected to continue thanks to blizzard conditions and strong winds and blowing snow across the northern slopes of the Brooks Range and probably southward into the Kotzebue Sound region, maybe parts of the interior of the Seward Peninsula itself. Let's check your pass conditions then. Expecting IFR for Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass as we go into Saturday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass likely seeing some improvement through the day, but probably not complete VFR just yet. Rainy Pass likely IFR and will trend toward IFR conditions for Windy Pass. Isabel Pass should maintain IFR. Mentasta Pass will call at least MVFR, maybe worse. And Tanita Pass IFR conditions leaning over toward MVFR by the end of the day. Portage Pass starts out at instrument flight rule, probably seeing some improvement during your Saturday, and Chilkoot and White Pass also seeing visibilities improve somewhat. For freezing levels, you'll notice the warm and wet air still hugging south and east, but for the rest of Alaska, it is below freezing, and that extends all the way up to about 2,000 feet just south of the chain, but most areas across the Great Land will be sub-freezing as we start out tomorrow. Icing potential, there certainly was some at low levels across Anchorage today as we were talking about yesterday, and for southeast, that threat's going to shift a little bit more toward the Panhandle, but you'll have to climb above 3,000 feet and maintain below 8,000 feet to run into anything that's probably reaching occasional moderate status. There will still be some light icing potential across the south central coast, Copper River Basin and the Kenai Peninsula, and also across the YK Delta and into the lower Yukon Valley, mainly below 4,000 feet, and also developing threat across the western Aleutians, mainly above 3,000 feet for a little while. Low pressure across the western U.S. is helping to guide a ridge of high pressure in that associated warm and wet pattern into south and east. The trough of low pressure across the YK Delta, encouraging stronger winds there reaching the Alaska Peninsula and the Kodiak Island region around 120 knots or so. And another jet max coming across eastern Siberia. That's keeping the winds stirred up at the surface there across parts of the Beaufort Seacoast. High pressure across the western Bering Sea, also pushing a little bit of northward movement across the Kamchatka Peninsula there at about 50 knots or so. A little bit closer to home, 9,000 feet we go in the trough of low pressure all the way from the northern Yukon Territory down toward the YK Delta and south of the Aleutians. The broad south and westerly flow is sweeping winds anywhere from 15 knots to about 30 knots across southeast. Winds are fairly light at this level across the interior, a little bit stronger coming across the Chukchi seacoast and stronger still as you head west of the Bering Strait with that northerly flow developing. That lessens somewhat as you get to the central and western Aleutians between 10 and 15 knots. Similar pattern here. Winds are a little bit lighter there across the Gulf, anywhere from 20 to 35 knots. A little bit of a stronger flow, though, punching into the Alaska Peninsula at 50 knots. Also wrapping into low pressure here across the west coast. Northerlies become a little bit stronger there coming through the Bering Strait. Easterly winds at 3,000 feet also stronger across the Beaufort Seacoast. More of a stronger westerly component coming out of the central and eastern interior between 10 and 20 knots. And high pressure east of the Kamchatka Peninsula is bringing in that colder northerly flow. Also, we see the increase in winds across the central and eastern Aleutians there, around 25 knots when that reaches Adak and Atka at 3,000 feet. Turbulence potential then will maintain that across the Alaska Range and points south and across the western Alaska Range, especially all the way down the Alaska Peninsula, mainly below 5,000 feet, which is where you could expect some occasional chop. Also light to isolated moderate across a large part of the Kenai Peninsula and Prince William Sound. And because of those wraparound winds that are coming into the backside of the storm, look for some occasional chop along the Chukchi Seacoast and through the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island, Nunivak Island, and the YK Delta region. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with a look at the ice edge and your marine weather here in just a few minutes.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ed Cornfield. On behalf of the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation and Alaska Public Media, welcome to another edition of Hangar Flying. Tonight we have asked Mr. Mike Hunt, Captain Mike Hunt, to join us back again on Hangar Flying, finish his stories about aviation, and as you remember, Mike was a World War II ferry pilot on the Lend-Lease program, and we started talking about his trip to Washington, but welcome back to Hangar Flying, Mike.
Glad to be here, Ed.
But I wanted to break away from that and talk about something that happened in about the mid-50s, 1955, 56, on a DC-4 that you may tell us a story about in somewhere in Hudson's Bay in Canada. So maybe start out and tell us what happened there.
Yes. Well, Ed, I'll have to tell you that this came at a time in my life when I become a soldier of fortune. My airline had just gone belly up, and I had to make a living for my family, and I took on some pretty risky projects. And salvaging a DC-4 from the ice in Hudson Bay was one of them. My partner, Amos Heacock, and myself bought this DC-4 from the insurance company for $5,000. And then we went to the owner of the airplane and said, we'll salvage this airplane for half of its value. You supply the materials and the assets we need to salvage it, and we get half of it and you get half. The airplane had actually ran out of fuel. It passed up Coral Harbor, ran into headwinds, and tried to stretch their flight to Fort Churchill, but didn't make it, and landed 40 miles short of Churchill out on the ice. The pilot thought the ice looked smooth from his altitude, and maybe he could land and dog sled some fuel out to the airplane, and then they could fly it on into Churchill. But unfortunately, when he got low, there were some pressure ridges in the ice, and it knocked the right landing gear off of the airplane. And there she sat on the ice, on the wingtip. And at first, you say, well, we can put the gear under it and fly it out. But it was damaged too bad. May is getting kind of late in the year, and ice goes out by, well, in a month. And our first object was to drop hay and sawdust around the airplane to insulate this pad of ice. And then we'd pull it to shore at Fort Churchill, and we'd have an airplane on the beach. But just in case the ice didn't hold, why, we bought 13 pontoon crossing boats, big rubber boats they use for crossing streams. And we put 12 of those under the wings of the airplane And the 13th one, we put it inside just in case ice scraped off all the pontoons. Well, we'd still get something, a little salt water on it. And we bought a helicopter, a 47 and a Super Cub to shuttle back and forth to the ice. Landing a Super Cub on a piece of ice out there is kind of tricky too, and anyway, I'll shorten the story. We bumped into so many pieces of ice that the airplane came down on its pontoons. And then we went out there with 2 old whale boats and a canoe to pull it in. And the boats were in bad shape. You had to bail water out of them. But we didn't have to pull all that ice. We just pulled the airplane on the pontoons. And we came into the mouth of the Churchill River July the 4th. I'm going to say 1956, although I'm not sure that's the right date, but I know it was July 4th. And then the harbor master there has a big slipway. He put it out into the water at high tide, and we floated over the top of it and tied to the stanchions on it. And then when the tide went out, we're sitting high and dry on this big railroad platform. He started up his steam engine and winched us up on the shore. And from there, we disassembled the airplane, and it was loaded on 6 railroad flat cars and went to Wildwood, New Jersey for rebuild.
Yeah, well, what a great story. That's quite a feat, and we've got about 30 seconds left, so I just want to thank you very much for being on the show, for sharing your stories. I hope to have you back again another time. Folks, mark your calendars for the annual Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation's Fall Seminar, November 23rd from 8 to 4 at the UAA Aviation Complex located at Merrill Field. This year's focus will be on accident prevention. Thank you very much for watching, and fly safe.
Thanks a lot to both of you, Ed and Mike, for joining us tonight. Here's a look at today's Sea Ice Edge as analyzed by the Sea Ice Program at the Anchorage National Weather Service office. Along the Beaufort Seacoast and the Chukchi, you can see extensive ice coverage there, and that is filling in varying thicknesses, of course, but the main concern, of course, at this time of the year would be watching how the Bering Strait closes off. And again, as we talked about earlier in the show, perhaps by this time next week that will be closed off or very close to doing so. We've got considerable ice coverage there for the Kotzebue Sound and Norton Sound region filling in nicely there. Shore ice filling in from Hooper Bay all the way around to Nunivak Island almost and into the Bristol Bay region, and also seeing a little bit of ice growth around the northern parts of the Cook Inlet. If you're around Anchorage and points south, you probably noticed that. So anytime you like to check on the ice coverage, you can do so by going to weather.gov, click on Alaska, and on the left-hand side of your screen, you should see something that says Ice Desk, and it'll give you the tools to produce an image similar to this. Across southeast, breezy conditions will continue for Saturday there. Up and down the inner channels, 25 to 30 knots, mainly from the south with 5 to 6 foot seas on the inside and 14 to 15 foot seas coming along the coast there from the west and northwest predominantly. As we get into Sunday, the winds are settling down around Yakutat with a 10-knot wind blowing offshore, but more of a north and easterly flow developing from Gustavus all the way down to Craig. It will be a little bit colder and windier with seas around 9 to 10 feet, and in the inner channels there, seas drop to about 3 to 4 feet with winds around 15 to 20 knots, still holding on a southeasterly flow in the inside channels down south around Ketchikan and Metlakatla. Around south central, a south and westerly flow will predominate as we get into Saturday. You'll notice the Cook Inlet there looking at 30-knot winds for the most part. Once you get around Kenai and northward, around the Chillicothe Strait, southwesterlies with a 13-foot sea. Same goes for the eastern side of Kodiak Island, blowing into the eastern side of the Kenai Peninsula and Prince William Sound around 25 to 15 knots as you get a little bit farther north inside Prince William Sound with a 2-foot sea becoming northeasterly as we get into Sunday. South and southeasterlies between 15 and 20 knots, 25 knots coming into Kodiak Island. More of an easterly flow inside Chillicothe Strait and north and easterly winds developing in the Cook Inlet there as colder air settles in and drains out to sea. 2 to 3 foot seas expected inside Cook Inlet. Across southwest in the Alaska Peninsula, 35-knot winds there into Bristol Bay with an 11-foot sea. Freezing spray is going to be an issue there throughout the weekend. A northerly flow north of Cold Bay in the Alaska Peninsula with an 8-foot sea, and southwesterlies on the south side with 8 to 11-foot seas on the Pacific side. Southeasterlies develop on Sunday there. Look for 25 to 30-knot winds, 15-foot seas on the south side, 7 to 8-foot seas on the north side. And again, watch out for the threat of freezing spray. For the Aleutians, you're looking at more of a north and easterly flow to continue through the bulk of the weekend. 25-knot winds on the north side, but it looks like gales will continue on the south side. 35-knot winds there with 9 to 14-foot seas continuing through Saturday there, so considerably more wind and chop there on the south side. As you get into Sunday, more of a northerly flow developing, 20 to 25-knot winds there with 8-foot seas on the north side, 10 to 13-foot seas on the south side, and easterlies developing across the far western parts of the chain as low pressure continues to track closer to home. More of a north and westerly flow coming down the west coast. This is going to be cold stuff, and heavy freezing spray is possible in some of these areas. 25 to 30-knot winds there from St. Lawrence Island down to the Pribilofs with a 9 to 10-foot sea coming into the Kuskokwim Bay area, and 8 to 10-foot seas there north of Nunivak Island out toward the St. Matthew Island waters. Out of the Bering Strait, we keep that northerly flow going for Sunday, but as you look around Hooper Bay and Nunivak Island and Kuskokwim Bay, get more of that northeasterly shift there. So a little bit of a change to close out the weekend. 5 to 8-foot seas there closer to the coast, 8-foot seas around the Pribilofs, and 6-foot seas around St. Lawrence Island. Easterlies continue for the Arctic coast there. Of course, we're dealing with ice, and the winds will be a little bit stronger as a result of that. More of a 35-knot wind. Northeasterlies around Barrow and points southward with heavy freezing spray again all the way into the Kuskokwim Bay, or the Kotzebue Sound area, I should say, with 10-foot sea expected on Saturday. That diminishes to 5-foot seas as we get into Sunday. That northeasterly flow continues as we look up the coast there, and more of an easterly flow diminishing to 10 to 15 knots for Sunday afternoon as we get into the Beaufort Seacoast to close out the weekend. That's a look at your marine forecast. Let's recap what's going on tonight. Winter storm warnings for the lower Yukon and lower Koyukuk and middle Yukon valleys there. As you look at tonight, winter storm warnings may bring storm totals up to 6 to 12 inches in some of those areas. That's the west side of the storm. Winter weather advisories for a large part of south central, including the Matanuska-Susitna valleys there, where you might see anywhere from 2 to 6 inches of snow, including parts of Anchorage, and the Beaufort Seacoast under blizzard warnings that will expire as we head into tomorrow. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather. We'll see you again here tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.